Edition Day, and the Motocross Action Wrecking Crew is excited to ride the 2022 and a half KTM 450SXF. This thing is all new from the ground up. There's really nothing that crosses over from last year's model. It's got the new frame, got a new 450 engine, got new mapping, new map switches. It's got the quick shift button. So a lot of stuff going on with the ECU. We're excited to test that out. KTM also said that they're really trying to make the 450 and 250 engines very different from map 1 to map 2. They're also trying to make both engines stronger in the mid-range. People have talked about how smooth the KTMs are. I personally really like the smooth factor that they've had before, so I'm excited to see what the differences are on this bike. It's got the new frame, like I mentioned, got a new shock, this crazy exotic bodywork that's definitely wild to look at, but starting to grow on me as we've seen it for a couple of months now. So today's the first day of riding it. In this video, we're gonna shake down all the details about this bike, let you know what we like, what we don't like, and let you know what you should watch out for if you buy this bike yourself. So let's get into the video right here. All right guys, factory edition day at Fox Raceway is in the books. Myself and Brian Medeiros, he owns Ecolu Suspension Company, and he's been a test rider for MXA for a long time, so he's a wealth of knowledge to have on the crew. We also had Josh Fout, MXA test rider. He's a intermediate novice vet range. He's a good test rider for us. He races everything we have. He races off-road races and all kinds of stuff. So we had 3 different test riders on the 250 and 450 today. In this video, we're gonna talk all about the 450 and how it worked on the track. First impressions, this thing is louder and faster than last year's bike. We did bring last year's factory edition, the 2021 and a half 450 SXF, and rode it back to back with this model. It was awesome just to bring that bike out here and be able to spin laps back to back. It's hard to tell differences if you don't have, models to compare back to back, and that's what we did today. This new bike is much louder, much faster, and much harder hitting off the bottom end, where last year's bike is quite a bit less on horsepower, but also quite a bit less on sound as well. So some people love the 450 power for the 2022, the current model, and some people want a little more hit. They want a little more bottom end, like maybe a Yamaha or a Honda 450 has. I personally was a fan of the smooth power band that the 450 had on the current model because I could ride it hard and I could use all of it, and it won't ever really get away from me. This new 450 today, first thing you notice when you get on the track for me, Josh Fout, and Brian Medeiros was all how fast it was straight off the gate. The frame is completely different. As I mentioned at the intro of this video, when you're looking at the bike, besides the bodywork, besides the exotic plastics, the main thing you notice is the frame and how it comes down from the top tube and comes down to the foot peg. So before, like I mentioned, the backbone went kind of all the way across the bike, underneath the seat, all the way from your handlebars down to where your shock mounted to the frame. Now, the shock is mounted separately from the top tube of the frame on these KTMs. So separating the frame into 2 different pieces, you have the front of the frame and then you have, a separate piece for the shock, actually helped quite a bit on the track today. It helped us get a little more rear end traction and quite a bit more balance. I was definitely surprised with that. So the new 450 is brand new. Engine, frame, bodywork, suspension even, all brand new on this bike. There's barely any components that cross over. I think the fuel cap and maybe a couple of other minor details. Everything else brand new for this bike, but it doesn't feel like a crazy brand new model. It feels like a refined version of the previous model, and that's a good thing because people that really like the KTMs before will hopefully like this bike as well. Talking more about the frame and the handling of this bike, with that backbone splitting off into 2 parallel frame spars and going straight down to the foot pegs, separating the shock mount, it kind of splits the bike in half. That's the way I'm thinking of it in my head, and after listening to the KTM guys talk about this new frame technology, it splits the rear end up from the front end. So now the rear end, it works a little more independently of the front end. So when you're hitting braking bumps coming into the corners, I actually felt like I got less hit in my hands on the braking bumps than I did when we hopped on last year's model. So hopping on last year's model, you hit braking bumps and you could feel it in your hands. They felt bigger on the current 2022 platform. When we hop on this 2023 platform, it felt smoother over the braking bumps, and that was actually a pleasant surprise, something that I was really stoked on. Talking to Roger DeCosta and talking to the KTM guys, a big reason for splitting up the rear shock from the backbone of the frame is to help with supercross whoops. They wanted to get get better at skimming whoops. Roger said it to me in an interview that we did with him. What that translates for us is smoother operation going through the braking bumps and entering into corners. So that was pretty cool. Both Brian, Josh Fowl, and myself all agreed that these bikes were smoother coming into corners, and that rear end chatter didn't really affect your handlebars as much as it normally would. So the swing arm is completely new. The linkage is completely new as well, but the rising rate of the shock is actually still the same. So it's kind of wild. The new shock looks super exotic. It's got hands-free adjustments on the compression, the high-speed adjuster at the top of the shock, and also hands-free adjustment at the rebound on the bottom, which is going to be kind of hard to get your hand in there. They did make it so you could stick a flathead screwdriver and still turn the rebound if you need to do that as well, if it's hot or dirty, or you just don't want to stick your hand in between there. It's actually shorter, lighter weight, the spring is shorter and everything. What they did to that shock is they made it shorter to fit with the new frame geometry, but it still has the same rising rate and supposed to still have the same spring rate as well. So more about the suspension. The air forks are still generally the same as they were last year. These forks got huge updates in 2021, and we've really liked these air forks. Only a small minor change to the bottoming cone at the bottom of the forks, but other than that, it got valving updated to work with this new frame and platform. The shock completely different. If you have an aftermarket shock from last year, it will not fit on this bike. More about the frame geometry. It's got a new subframe. It's got aluminum spars coming down to connect it to the frame, but then it's got the same carbon composite top mount to the subframe that Husqvarna has had, that same material that Husky has had for their entire subframe for the past few years. Now it's kind of a mix between aluminum and carbon composite plastic subframe. So we've had issues with Husqvarna's breaking the carbon composite subframes in the past, and a lot of fast guys and guys that have crashed big time have broken the carbon composite subframes on the Huskies. Now the new KTM and the Rockstar Edition Husqvarnas will have the aluminum and carbon composite kind of mixed into the subframe. So they showed us some videos of the subframe bending, and it's pretty impressive how far it can bend and still snap back right into the place. And then talking about the swing arm, there's a new one-piece swing arm. It's supposed to be more rigid, but to work with that and to complement the whole thing, the rear end has a smaller axle. So it went from a 25mm rear axle to a 22mm rear axle, and they did that to help with flex characteristics, give a little more give basically on the rear wheel. So you will be able to use your aftermarket wheels from last year's bike on this bike, because all you have to change out is the spacers and the seals on the wheel, and your aftermarket wheels from last year or your stock wheels from last year will fit right onto this bike. Diving into the engine on the 450 has been updated. It's got increased compression. They did some updates to make it stronger in the mid-range. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this bike is definitely faster than it was before. But another thing they did to the engine that actually is helping out handling quite a bit is they changed the engine. They brought the cases in. It's about an inch shorter from front to back now. They also rotated it 2 degrees backwards. This drops the countershaft sprocket to lessen the squat when you hit the throttle. So if you guys probably seen riders in slow motion, or see when a rider lands off of a jump and they hit the throttle hard, the rear end squats because of that chain torque is pulling the swing arm up. They wanted to lessen that squat, partially for supercross whoops, which doesn't affect a lot of the average riders, but also just to ride over regular bumps, riding outdoor tracks as well, to make it smoother and help the suspension to be a little more plush. So they're centralizing mass in the engine, they're rotating it, they're bringing it all a little bit tighter, and that affects handling as well as the power characteristics of this bike. So one of the thoughts I had when I jumped on it was that it almost feels like a Honda in that it was super easy to whip in the air. It's super nimble in the air, and the effects that help you feel nimble on the motorcycle is centralized mass, a light motorcycle with all of the heaviest parts about it, centralized at the engine, centralized, at the center of the motorcycle. It's going to be easier to tip in and out of corners. I felt better in the air and a little more nimble on this motorcycle, so that was a plus and pretty fun to feel. So overall, the engine is definitely strong on this motorcycle, and to add to that is the new mapping that it has for 2023, really, this 2022 and a half. The new mapping and even really kill switch and start switch are definitely way different for this bike. The kill switch and start switch are all on the right-hand side, which is really weird to get used to. The other part I don't really like is that the buttons are flat. It's not really a defined little button like it was before, so it was getting confused. I was hitting the kill switch and the on switch at the wrong times and a little bit hard to feel. I'm also going to shut off the motorcycle and I'm changing the map, so that was weird. It's gonna take some time to get used to, and I'll get used to it eventually pretty quickly, but for people who don't get to ride every day or don't even get to ride every week, it might take some time to get used to that. So that was definitely weird. The map switch, it is nice that it's not too big. Other bikes are really big, especially Honda. It was nice that it wasn't too big. So map 1 is the white map on top. Supposed to be smoother, it's supposed to be the stock map. Map 2 is the green map, a little bit more power. It's today at Fox Raceway, I didn't feel like it was a crazy jump. Some of the KTM guys were explaining that they noticed a big difference between the two maps. I didn't notice a crazy difference. I mean, the bike feels fast in both maps. So we're gonna have to spend more time to figure out the mapping and see what it's all about. It also has traction control, which I do like when the track is super slippery, whether it's either too dry or too wet. I do like traction control for those reasons. It also has the quick shift option, which is very, very weird. So that was a very big question mark when they came out with this bike and started talking about it. The quick shifter, it's a small little button that you can press. It turns a little blue light on. It's not something you could really hit while you're riding. I do like to mess with maps while I'm riding. It's kind of hard to get that one because the button is so small at the bottom of the map switch. Clicking it into quick shift mode, it definitely shifts quicker, but it definitely cuts the ignition and cuts the engine as you're shifting. So if you've ridden street bikes, this has been common technology for a long, long time. Jody was explaining that back in the day, before they had this technology, when he was racing road race bikes a long time ago, he would actually hit the kill switch for just a split second while he shifted up, because in road racing, it's the end of your race if you have to let off mid straightaway to shift or pull in the clutch to shift, because you need that high speed. In motocross, there's not a lot of people complaining about that, and the KTMs are already really good at shifting, so adding this quick shift feature was weird for me. Talking to different people today, they say 50% love it, 50% hate it. I was in the hate it category. Personally, I was hangry when I was riding. I was hungry and tired. Travis had me going and going for laps, and the first time I tried quick shift, it was kind of cutting out a little bit, and I was noticing it, and then I tried to hit this little double out of a corner, and at the top I shifted. I didn't even think about shifting, it just naturally wanted to click into third gear, and when I did that, it cut. It didn't throw me off balance, it didn't really make me, get out of whack, but it was just scary to hear the motorcycle kind of cut out for a second at the top of a jump. I was really frustrated afterwards, and quick shift is definitely something that I'm not a fan of after day one, but I still have more time to put on this bike and more time to get used to it. We'll see long straightaways at Glen Helen. It might be pretty nice to have that. This bike does not come with the Bluetooth mapping that the factory editions came with last year. Talking to the KTM guys, they do say that they will be back on these motorcycles in the near future, but they explained that it was COVID reasons that they haven't been able to get the chips and get the parts in time to put them on these motorcycles. So no Bluetooth mapping on this bike, but they say it will be back in the future. This is a factory edition model. We're testing it like it's a 2023 model because it really is. It's got the frame, the engine, swing arm, subframe, mapping, and all the stuff that you're gonna find on the 2023 model that we're gonna get in 4 or 5 months, but it's still a factory edition. So it comes with the factory wheels, comes with the factory power parts, triple clamps, comes with an orange gripper seat cover, which I'm a huge fan of gripper seat covers. I don't know if I love the orange, but it's orange, it stands out. It's got the Red Bull KTM graphics. It's also got the orange sprocket. It's got the skid plate, the whole shot device as well. So a few other goodies that come on this motorcycle because it is a factory edition bike. It doesn't have a different muffler. It's still the stock muffler that KTM comes with. And like I mentioned, the muffler is definitely louder on this motorcycle. The KTM factory edition will be retailing for $11,699, and they say they should be available at your dealer soon, but it's gonna be extremely hard to get this motorcycle because they only imported 400, I believe, just enough to make it for the factory exemption for the Supercross guys like Marvin Musquin, Cooper Webb, and Aaron Plessinger to be able to race these bikes in AMA Supercross. They are available now. They're gonna be expensive and they're gonna be hard to get. As for the weight of these motorcycles, last year's bike, the current bike, weighs 223 pounds. We believe these are gonna be a little bit heavier, but we haven't got it on our scales yet. They come with Dunlop MX33 tires. Factory edition motorcycles have been around since 2012. That was the first ever factory edition, and that was implemented so that Ryan Dungey could have a new model to race Anaheim 1 and race the 2012 season on. Other motorcycles that were good for factory edition bikes were the 2015 model, the 2018 model, and now the 2022 model. So this is a look at what's gonna come for 2023. Every year in between is more just a kind of glossed over model that has some upgrades. Fun times riding the 2023 pre-production bike, the factory edition. It was easier to get to the airbox. It was a little bit easier to open and get the airbox cover on, so that was a nice touch. Unfortunately, the air filter is different now. So your air filters that you had previously, we have a million of them. They won't fit into this new bike. Another thing to note is this was just our first day of riding at Fox Raceway on this new model. We're gonna get the Husqvarna Rockstar Edition bikes, which are basically exactly the same. We're gonna get those bikes in about a month, and when those videos come out, we'll have a lot more information about how this bike works, different settings for different tracks and stuff like that. And also we'll have a full article, in-depth details about this bike after we ride it for a couple months and race it. It'll be in a future issue of Motocross Action magazine. So if you aren't subscribed to Motocross Action, you definitely need to do that so you can get all the details about this bike and more bike tests, product tests, and reviews in the magazine as well. Lots of good content in there. So thank you guys for tuning in. We're gonna be taking this thing to Glen Helen tomorrow. We're gonna be putting a lot more time on this model. Also, be sure to check out our 250 Factory Edition model, as KTM came out with not one, but 2 factory editions this year. We're gonna have a video on that one as well. If you guys like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Motocross Action YouTube channels. We got a lot of videos coming and we're doing our best. If you have any questions about this bike, leave a comment down below. I'll definitely read through the comments, and if I have the answer, I'll let you guys know there.